Thanks for the question. Happy to answer. Hope you weren't looking for a short one. So, the TLDR is a philosophy that I like to follow. Risk creates suspense, suspense creates tension, tension creates fear, and fear creates impact. Now, what does all that mean? As a DM, there's a couple rules that I like to follow to make sure that I'm making death impactful and meaningful throughout the campaign. Now, this isn't in any particular order, but one of the rules that I like to follow is that death cannot be the only option. Now, in encounters, it's far too often that we run into games where the players and DMs are expecting a to the death fight. And while this can be fun for a lot of games, this is not great to make death meaningful because it's a burn and churn type of mentality, or it just makes death less of a threat and just more of a product of the mechanic. So in order to create that suspense, to create tension, to create fear, you need to create options. You need to have more options to end battles, and the players need to know that those options exist. So things like surrendering, running away, knocking out, these need to be more common and more well known. And something like a fight to the death needs to be something that's chosen, or something that's left to the more higher tier battles, so it's not expected every single time. So when it is on the line, when it is the end of the battle, everybody knows that this means something more than, yep, we're just fighting yet another person, because that's what it gets into. Every time death is at the door, every fight becomes the same. It just depends on the difficulty. But when death only happens once in a while, it creates that suspense. And especially when you keep a track record of doing it at more intense battles, and then you throw in a random low level battle that they think is going to be yet another walk in the park, and then suddenly death is on the line because they're a poisonous creature they didn't know about, they really start to get that tenseness, because now they never know when death's going to be there. It's not there every time, but now you've thrown it all out the window because it's not only at boss fights. So death cannot be the only option is one of the rules that I follow. Another one that I like to follow is that the choice of death needs to land on the players more than it lands on you. And essentially a good rule to follow is that as a DM, I try not to be in control of more than 40% of the possible outcomes of death. And what that means is throughout the entire campaign, there will be monsters, there will be encounters, there will be puzzles and situations that I throw at my players that may result in their death. But out of every 100 encounters, or out of every 100 potential ways that the player could have killed the character, I want to make sure that 40% of those are my doing, like I put them in front of them, and that the other 60% are the player's doings, meaning I gave them a safe way to do it and an unsafe way to do it, and they chose the unsafe way. So this basically allows a mentality that it is always on the players to choose which is the best route, which is the safest route, and which route will get them what they want. But some routes are going to be more treacherous, and it's going to be on them to decide, is it worth that risk? And that takes a lot off of you as a DM, and it puts a lot more of that investment as a player and as a character into every decision that's made, instead of it feeling like the railroad kind of campaign where the potential death moments are all planned out. This allows you to make sure that they know that death is at any corner. It just depends on which corner they choose to turn. Another thing that I like to do as a DM is keep an idea that of how to balance reminders of death versus encounters with death. This kind of goes back to death can't be the only option. But what I mean by this is it's great to ensure that they are constantly reminded that death is an option, whether it's in RP and it's personal to the players or to the characters that they play, whether it's encounters with the BBEG and reminding the players of what's on the line if they don't win, having threats on their lives that they realize they can't control, the mindset of if I can get to you now, I can get to you whenever, or just close calls. Like I mentioned before, ending battles in a way that they knew that they should have died, but not necessarily Deus Ex Machina, but being allowed to live for one reason or another. Having more near-death experiences and more reminders that death is around the corner is more impactful than just constantly having battle after battle that brings you to 1 or 2 hit points, right? Being close and encountering near-death experiences is, not as impactful as being reminded that at any moment this could happen to you. Having, constantly giving them NPC guides that trigger traps and die in front of them, out of happenstance or things of that matter, just reminding them along the way that, hey, this could be you. Don't make the wrong step. Don't turn the wrong corner. Now, beyond all of that, you were talking about death saving throws. Now, there's a couple things. I don't really do death saving throws, so I only have a few examples here. One of the ones that I've heard that I feel is probably one of the best is just hiding the death saving throws. You make them for the players, and then they just don't know where their death saving throws are. And then that way, there's just that tension that I was talking about. I think tension's the best way to create that fear of death. Another way to do it is add your own secret counters to all of the characters, and essentially these will, over time, as you put them on them, will inflict minor to moderate afflictions. So they may suddenly start to slow down, or they may get disadvantage on something, or they may start to hallucinate. And it would be up to them to figure out why it's happening. Do they need sleep? Do they need food? Do they need to go do something in order to stop it? Essentially adding in some survival mechanics, or I know there's a lot of other TTRPGs that do it, but if you're just trying to add it to your own setting, adding anything that reminds them that they have to pay attention to things, otherwise they could deteriorate, and that deterioration could easily lead to the end of the game. But these things aren't known to them, so they'll be subtle enough to be they'll be aware of it, but it won't be so obvious that they immediately know, oh, I'm under a condition. Things that I like to do also in order to make it more impactful, I like to alter the way that I do hit points. So another methodology that I like, a philosophy that I have, is what I like to call the avatar of mortality. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be a legitimate NPC in your realm, although it can. That's kind of why I call it the avatar of mortality. But this is essentially for a way for DMs to, again, remind the players and the characters throughout the campaign that their mortality exists, that they aren't just these powerhouse superheroes that won't ever go down. So this could be anything from inflicting wounds, temporary wounds that give them penalties for a short period of time, to scars that are obvious and potentially detrimental to their charisma. Losing an ear, losing an eye could have different effects on people and how NPCs interact with them. Giving them actual disabilities, nightmares, a limp, permanently removing 5 feet of movement from their character. These are all reminders that past consequences got them near to, but never over the line of death. And another thing that I like to do is add in like a fatigue system. So keep track of their HP, and as they get closer and closer to 0 at a percentage basis or whatever, you just start to inflict more and more penalties to remind them that death isn't the only thing, but if they keep pushing themselves, it's right there. So giving them the option and the reminder that you can back out now just kind of keeps it at their choice, and it kind of keeps them aware that it can happen at any moment if they're not careful. The only other thing that I can really say is that the best thing to do is make sure that the players are invested in their characters. If they're not, then death just becomes, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, that character's gone. And always remember that you should balance freedom with consequence. Let them be free to do whatever they want, but ensure that they understand that every choice comes with consequence, both positive and negative. Because again, if the threat is just drafting up a new character or that they can't game with that group anymore, it's not going to be as impactful. It basically means that it has to be done in-game, in RP, and to make that in-game impactfulness, it relies on the idea that they actually have to feel like they're actually losing something. Actual loss is what's going to create that fear. And like I said, to create that loss, you have to give them the idea that their choices have risk. That perceived risk will create the suspense. That suspense will create the tension. That tension will create the fear, and that fear will create the impact. I hope that helps.